The Louisiana Book Festival enjoyed its 6th year in downtown Baton Rouge, representing over 100 authors. Join us for Louisiana Book Talks as we celebrate our rich literary culture with highlights from the 2008 Louisiana Book Festival, featuring authors Rick Bragg and John Dufresne. Book lovers of all ages enjoy the variety of activities offered at the Louisiana Book Festival. Between the Capitol Building and the State Library, the festival is packed with booths housing everything from storytellers to basic printmaking skills, and cartoon artists to specialty publishers. In the state capitol, authors read from their latest works, often providing personal insight to their writing. We'll begin this edition of Book Talks with author Rick Bragg, a Pulitzer Prize-winning national correspondent for the New York Times, whose books include the critically acclaimed bestseller All Over But the Shoutin'. A native of Alabama, Bragg learned the local storytelling tradition while growing up in Possum Trot, a community near Jacksonville at the foothills of the Appalachians. Today, Bragg teaches writing at the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. He discusses the third of his series of family memoirs, The Prince of Frogtown.
How many of you ladies, by show of hands, are married to a Southern man? How many of you feel like you got a good one? How many of you are lying? There's always one or two brave souls that'll leave their hand up. Well, and All Over But the Shoutin', my daddy was kind of the anvil that I used to beat the story out about my mom. You know, his darkness made her light brighter. And there wasn't much good to say. I only knew him a grand total of about 6 months because he would come in and out of our lives. And there was never anything good to say, just bad. And what I wanted to do was not, in my life, not having a good thought about my dad. So I went from little mobile home to Mill Village house to places out in the country, and I knocked on the door and I asked one question. Tell me one good story about my daddy, please. I guess that's begging more than it is asking a question. Tell me one good story about my dad. And it's not any more complicated than that, really. I just wanted one good story. And it only took 5 years to find that many people. I asked my mama, I said, tell me one good story about my dad. And she said, did you hear I got a raise on my Social Security? So I waited a few months. I said, just tell me one good story. She said, did you hear that a hole opened up in your Aunt Gracie Juanita's living room ceiling and from dry rot, and a snake fell through it and it almost landed in the lap of your Uncle Ed? And I thought, well, that's a hell of a story, Mama, but that's not what I asked you. And without exaggeration, more than a year went by. And my mama loves me. She won't tell me no, so she just talks around it, you know. And finally, we were sitting in the living room, and I don't know if your mamas have routines before they go to bed, but my mama has the same routine. She sits in what she calls her depression chair. That don't mean that it was bought during the Depression. It means it's the chair she sits in and worries about her sons. And often, at least one of us gives her very good reason to worry. And so she calls it her depression chair. She sits in her depression chair and she watches the weather, which is the only part of the news she really cares anything about knowing. And then she reads the weekly paper. And in a world where always the weekly paper, because in a world where you get your news like this, and you get it that quick, and you get it streaming across the internet, a daily paper just moves too fast for my mother. So she reads the weekly. And she sits there and watches maybe 15 minutes of gun smoke. You know, anything that she's fairly certain of the outcome of. And then she drifts off. And then within minutes of drifting off, she gets up and goes to bed. And she did that one night. I was sitting in the corner of the room. And without even being asked, she said, well, there were the letters. And I said, what letters? She said, the letters he wrote me when he was in the Pokey. And Daddy was a Marine over in Korea and signed up for another hitch, but then just decided he didn't want to be a Marine no more. And we do things like that. I mean, you know, the law said he needed to go on and do that other hitch, but he decided to come home, hid in a chifforobe. True story. But while he was there, he was in the stockade. They sent him up to Virginia to the stockade. And while he was there, he wrote her every day. And when he was in the county jail, he wrote her every day. Daddy did time on and off in more than a few places. But he wrote, you know, and I said, well, did he write you something sweet from the Pokey? And she said, no. I said, well, what was it? And she said, well, it was the way he signed them. He signed every one of them, good night, sweetheart, I miss you, honey. And one day she gets a letter, and after his signature, he had written, P.S., look under the stamp. So she went and peeled, and you know, back then they made stamps to stay, you know, and she peeled it off, painstakingly peeled it off, and he'd written, I love you in tiny little letters. So you kind of got to love a man like that, even if he is a sorry man, you know. And so it took me a year and a half to get that story. And I just kept meeting people and meeting people and meeting people and meeting people who had something good to say, who at the time in their lives when they knew him, when he was a 6-year-old boy, when he was a 12-year-old boy, fist fighting, you know, in a Mill Village street, when he was that 6-year-old boy riding down a pine straw hill on a cardboard box. They had these wonderful stories to tell. And he meant something good to them in that time. So, you know, took me a damn long time to answer that, didn't it? But that's why we did it. It always amazes me. I'm always a little uncomfortable when I speak in this chamber because, y'all know that y'all are, and I've said this before, but y'all know y'all are the largest group to ever sit in here that wasn't under indictment. Right? I mean, I guess. I mean, you know, you never know. And I always feel like I've done something wrong, and I've got like 115 little judges sitting out there, you know, ready to. But, you know, it's not really any more complicated than that. And the stories range from, remember that time me and your daddy sat at Germania Springs and plotted to kill the police chief? Or as innocent as an old fella named Jack Andrews, who I talked to in his mobile home. He told me, he said, when me and your dad were 14, we liberated some string from the cotton mill. We must have had miles and miles and miles of string. So we made us a kite. And we laid down in this field and just let it go. And if you think about it, the only limit on a kite is string and wind. And they just lay there. Didn't even talk. Just did this. You know. Little boy saw them. Because after a while, the kite disappears. And it's just a string going up into the sky. And the little boy saw them and wanders over. My dad sees him and he says to his buddy Jack, "Don't say a word." And little fellow walks up and says, "What are y'all doing?" My daddy says, "Why, hell, we're fishing." Little boy says, "No." Daddy says, "Yeah." Little boy says, "Well, what are you fishing for?" My daddy just looks up at the string in the sky and says, "For the man in the moon." I didn't even know he had a sense of humor, you know. So it was worth doing. It was worth 5 years. I tell you this right now, a book contract works out to about minimum wage when you take 5 years to bring it in. But it was hard. I mean, I asked my brother Sam, I said, "Tell me one good story about Daddy." He said, "I don't remember one." And we were driving out, looking for a magic truck. Do y'all know, you fellows ever go looking for a magic? I'm not trying to be sexist, but it tends to be a thing more that a sorry man would do. There's what we in Alabama call the search for the magic truck. And really it's just an excuse to get away from your wife. And you get in your car or truck and you go to look at a used truck. Because somewhere out there is a magic truck. Everything on it is perfect, you know. And we were going to look for a magic truck, and we were driving through Anniston. My brother Sam drives like an old woman. The only thing he's missing is a pillbox hat and pearls. And so we had plenty of time to talk. And tell me one good story. He didn't have it. And finally, he said, "Well, there was that time that Christmas that Daddy bought me that red wagon and he bought you that big red tricycle." And I said, "Well, Daddy never bought me a damn tricycle." And there's two words that should never be used in the sentence, and it's damn and tricycle. You know, a tricycle should be a happier memory than that. But he never did. He said, "No, he did. He even put it together for you." I said, "I don't remember it." And he said, "That's because he got drunk and backed over it going out the driveway. Mama picked it up and hid it in the closet." I said, "I really don't remember it." And he said, "That was the idea." You know, so, you know, it was kind of scraping bone, but we did get them. And that's what that book is about. But between the stories about the good stories about my dad, and as you can imagine, the good stories come with a certain amount of pain, come with a certain amount of sadness. People needed a chance to breathe. So we wrote, in between the long chapters about me finding my dad, we wrote little short chapters about me becoming one. I inherited a 10-year-old boy when I got married, and that was an experience in itself. Some of the chapters about my dad really are, a little strong, like this one here. Jack Andrews cannot remember when he met my father or how, only that they were friends forever from that forgotten moment on. They were teenagers then, 15 or 16, as the 1940s slid into the 1950s. But even across all that time, Jack remembers what was in my father's mind, the things he said before they left town in uniform, the only ticket out for a West Side boy. Some words vanished, like silver dollars he buried in the yard and forgot where he dug the holes, but some were right where he left them. Like so many people here in the foothills of the Appalachians, he is an eloquent man, a survivor from an age of storytellers in a place where such people grow wild. He does not merely tell me he loved my father. He shows me, painting pictures on the dark. Like the time my father's family sent them to search for firewood in a cold spell when the whole village was turning blue. They found instead a pile of scrap wood and tar shingles. They'll burn, my father reasoned. He piled them into a fireplace, lit them, and they did burn. But the tar and creosote formed explosive gases that collected in the chimney. And, quote, all of a sudden there's big balls of fire shooting out the top of the chimney into the sky, Jack said. I looked at your daddy, and he was laughing and jumping up and down. Look, Jack, he said, we're setting the world on fire. And those should be happy things, but they always made me want to cry, because I don't know that guy. Didn't know him. Jack is ice-pick slim, and his soot-black hair is mostly gone. But he still sports a little pencil-thin mustache, and when he smiles, you see the rascal he once was, that they both were. You get the feeling that if he came across one last damsel in his old age, he would still know how to find a railroad track and tie a knot. He lives by himself in a trailer on a hilltop not far from Billy Measles, another friend, and walks slow and careful when he comes to the door now, so careful some people give up and go away. He has an old movie poster above the couch, Hondo, starring John Wayne. We used to talk about going west, me and Charles, to be cowboys, he said, smiling. They didn't want to string wire, rope cattle, or chop wood. They wanted to ride across the movies on silver-studded Mexican saddles, shoot pearl-handled revolvers, sign autographs, drive long convertibles with steer horns on the hood, and date platinum-haired starlets 2 at a time. We was full of foolishness, it's a fact, Jack said. But man, we built us some dreams. His lips trembled then, so he covered his mouth with one bony hand. It's good to live to be so damn old, Jack said, but it's awful lonesome. So you see what I mean. Some of those things were tough. When they were 15, they nailed steel taps to their Steinberg shoes so pretty girls could hear them coming, and it never occurred to them that the homely ones could hear them coming too. But at night, they'd slide their heels across the sidewalks and sparks would fly. Jack carried an old guitar slung on his back, and he could whoop Lovesick Blues like it was going out of style. My father played the spoons, laughing out loud as the girls drew close, hypnotized. Pick it again, Jack, he liked to say, and Jack picked till the frets felt hot in his hands. His glasses are thick as funhouse mirrors now. He said he'd play me a song, but his strings are broken. I told him not to worry. He could tell me one. He remembers the time they got drunk, or tried to, on a sample of perfume. They were giving it away at Crow Drug Store, and it was mostly alcohol. They sipped it and waited. You feel anything? My father asked. No, you, Jack said. Reckon it's poison? My father asked. Could be, Jack said. Be bad to be found dead, my father said, with perfume. Bad, Jack said. My father gasped. What? Jack said. Look at that damn monkey, my father said. What damn monkey? Jack said. That damn monkey climbing up that damn wall, he said. Jack was pretty sure he was lying, but he looked to make sure. Well, Jack said, there wasn't no damn monkey there, but that don't mean Charles didn't see one. That's a friend. That's a friend. Let me read you just a little bit of description about my dad, and then I'll read you a little bit about my boy. And they tell you, when you're reading in front of a large crowd of people, never to flip disconcertingly, through a book in front of a large crowd of people. But, I guess Tennessee Williams or Faulkner could, just flip right to where they wanted to go in a book, but I don't have that talent. I guess, Dickens just pointed at his book and just popped open to the right page. This is my daddy in 55. Man, I wish I could have seen him. They say he was slick and pretty. And when he leaned against his black and pearl 49 Mercury in his white Palm Beach suit and cherry red necktie, he looked like he got lost on his way to someplace special and pulled off here to ask the way. He always stole a red flower for his lapel. What magic to always steal a red one, and cinched up his pants with a genuine leatherette imitation alligator belt. His teeth were too good to be true, his canines long and wicked white, and he wore his wavy reddish-brown hair swooped up high on his head like the killer, Jerry Lee. It turned black when he combed it back with rose hair oil, and when he fought, leading with his right and punishing with his left, all that hair flopped over into those blue flame eyes. He only finished 6th grade, but he was drawing good government money then as a Marine and drove home every weekend from the base in Macon with one thing on his mind. He liked to pose on the square and see the girls sway by, but he wouldn't whistle because he'd already found the one. He smiled mischievous, my mother said, like he was picking life's pocket, like he was getting away with something by hanging around and breathing air. He was just another lint-head kid, but as different from the other men she knew, the brush arbor prophets, pulpwooders, and shade tree mechanics, as the mannequin in Steinberg's department store was from a cornfield scarecrow. When it was time to go, he slid behind the wheel and turned the key, and he looked like an angel, one of the fallen kind, as the big engine caught fire and he vanished in a blue-black, oily, noxious cloud. His car burned a lot of oil, my mother said. It burnt so much oil that a cloud followed him all around town. Burnt so much oil he couldn't keep oil in it. But instead of getting it fixed, he'd just go out to that filling station out on the highway, you know, where Young's used to be. And he'd pull it up to a barrel of burn oil they drained out of people's cars. And he'd dip it out in a bucket and put it in his old car. He'd just ride and ride. People used to laugh at him. They'd say, "Here comes that Bragg boy," in a cloud of smoke. She remembers him that way, in smoke. But sometimes, in a blue moon, she remembers him on his knees. It was about 4 months after we started seeing each other. We was at Germania Springs, and he was getting him a drink of water laying on his belly on the creek bank. You could drink it right out of the creek back then, and it was good and cold. Well, he got a drink, and he turned and looked at me. "Will you marry me?" he said. And I laughed at him, and he got mad. I think he cussed a little too. But I mean, who asks somebody to get married while they're on their belly getting a drink of water? "You're kidding, ain't you?" I told him, and then he cussed again. He said, "Hell, I was serious. Will you marry me?" But I giggled again. I couldn't quit. She has tried to forget so much it seems odd to try to remember. But she can still see him pushing himself up to his knees for a little dignity. For a second, just a second, he faced her on one knee, just like in a story. "I mean it, goddammit," he said. His face was bright, burning red. "Will you or not?" And in Alabama, that's what passes for a proposal. Here's a little more about him. The old men laughed at him, all duded up with that oil bucket in his hand, but the women loved his face. Even men so afraid of appearing feminine they'd walk a wide loop around the unmentionables in Sears just to avoid being in proximity of a panty, would concede that, yeah, Charles Bragg was a good-looking man. He had a movie star squared-off chin with a dashing white line across it like a dueling scar. He got it one night drunk when he banged his face on the steering wheel, but it made him look mysterious and a little bit dangerous all the same. He had Indian blood and cheekbones proud and high, and his face tanned a dark red. His ears and Adam's apple were too big, but his hands were small and delicate as a woman's, yet strong as wire pliers. He talked country but dressed town, the way all the Mill Village kids did back then. A hybrid hillbilly with silver dimes flashing in his black penny loafer shoes. He chain-smoked Pall Malls and toted a thin, yellow-handled knife in his left hip pocket so he could get at it quick. He slid a snub-nosed pistol at the small of his back, but only on weekends. and never when he was with her. He raised fighting dogs, bet on chickens, and loved vanilla ice cream. And I guess he was a scoundrel before he knew what a scoundrel was. He would cut you if you hemmed him up, said my father's cousin, Carlos Slat, whose daddy named him after a label he saw on a crate of Mexican apples in Christmas 1932. You can't make that up. If you turned him upside down and shook him as his older brothers were prone to do, dice and a pint of liquor would have bounced across the floor and 52 cards would have fluttered down, or 51 if he had one hid. The darkness he'd done an ocean away had left a mark on him, sure, but he hid it then, like his tattoos. Back home he drew his pocket comb like a gun, and could often be seen slouched at a table in the Ladaga Grill, preening, pretending not to notice the girls who noticed him. My mother was raised in the foothills. When she came to town as a young woman, it was to keep other people's babies and mop their floors. And here comes my father, all dressed up and slicked down and pool hall cool, with the mountains in his own bloodline and the Mill Village on his driver's license, but posing as something different, something more. He was quick and sharp as a serpent's tooth in that white suit, but not sharp enough to see that he did not need to pose for her. Oh, he sure did priss around, my mother said. I just liked his teeth. Thank you. But I never would have gotten through it, I don't think, if not for being able to disappear into my boy. I inherited the best boy on earth. There's not a better boy. There's just not. He's 14 now, but when I inherited him when he was 10, now he's 14, so of course he's from another planet. But even now, there just aren't any better boys, you know. I wrote this chapter in my head, and writers do that if the chapters are simple. You know, and I wrote it in my head. My mama was in the hospital, and I was sitting by her bed. She's fine, but I was laying there because I don't have a real job, so I get to do the night shift, you know. And they're not going to not let us sit by my mother's bed. So this is what I was thinking about. You don't sleep good in a chair by a hospital bed, but you do dream. I saw the woman in a bookstore in Memphis. She had the kind of beauty people write songs about. Red hair that tumbled to her shoulders in loose curls. Jade eyes flecked with gold. Lips of the most promising pink. She was tall and just a little bit slinky. Will you marry me? I asked. Smooth as a concrete block tumbling down a hill. No, she said. She taught at a college and knew a half-wit when she heard one. But I persevered, and we had a great, blistering romance. I wrote her love letters that should have made me gag, and she wrote me the same. I even saved one for when I'm old or alone. But she had to ask her littlest boy, who was her world, if she could remarry. Sure, he said. Where are we going on the honeymoon? I turned 46 in the summer of 2005 and became the closest thing to a father I will ever be because I loved a woman with a child. I guess it happens all the time. But a man who chases one with a child is like a dog that chases a car and wins. How many times since then have I stared at the boy in dumb wonder and muttered, Son, if your mama had just been homely, think how much easier my life would have been. But I would tolerate this boy for the woman. I believed I was catching him at a good age. He was house-trained, past diapering, but still too young to borrow my car or ask me questions on sex, about which, of course, I would be forced to lie. Because you can't look at a 10-year-old boy and go, get all you can! I did not expect much. All I wanted was a brave, clean boy who'd take out the trash, be kind to his mother, and occasionally bathe the big dog, which also came with the marriage and smelled as if it had already died. It'd be nice if the boy was coordinated, had good oral hygiene, could catch a football, did his homework, and did not run naked in the house. I should have lowered my expectations. He refused to hold his fork right, transforming me from what I always believed to be a real man into an etiquette-quoting popinjay. I watched him amazed as he chased a single green pea across the plate and dumped a mountain of mashed potatoes on the white tablecloth, all of which he would have scooped up and eaten if I had not threatened him with charm school. He showered as if he were running through a waterfall, barely getting damp before shouting to his mother, "Where's my pants?" If she did not respond, he would run naked after all. She had to inspect him after every bath because he would not use soap or wash his hair, or else wash just the front or back part of his head, hoping that would be the part she chose to inspect. I was a boy once too, but I did not look greasy after a bath, or festoon the back seat in used tissues, or sprinkle the floor mats with take-out biscuit crumbs as if I needed them to find my way home again. "Enjoy it," said the woman who bore this troglodyte, "because that little boy will disappear before your eyes." "When?" I asked. I almost ran the first time I saw him eat pancakes. He covered a table and his upper body with syrup, then spread it like plague. In one restaurant, he managed to get a gob of spaghetti sauce on his underarm. "You got some," I said, pointing. He licked it off. In another, he blew his nose so loud at the table it trembled the water glasses. "He's yours," I said to the woman. And I always said that, every time, because I didn't want anybody to think I was genealogically connected to this child. I hoped a boy so nasty would be tough and gritty, but instead this was a child of piano lessons and gifted schools, a child once rushed to the hospital with a tummy ache, where an x-ray showed that he had merely overdosed on cinnamon Pop-Tarts in Chick-fil-A. He yelled for his mother to come stomp a spider. He wept from a boo-boo, or if he was tired. It seemed too much that the boy would be gentle, pampered, and nasty. I guess it might have been easier if he had looked, sounded, or at least pretended to be a little more like me, or the boy I remembered myself to be. But on trips he traveled with his own pillow and blanket, which he called his blankie. He needed them, he said, to be comfy. "Boys," I said, "do not have a blankie." "Yes, they do," he said. He was too pampered and too helpless, I thought, to enjoy or endure the company of men like me. He was a sensitive, loving, gentle boy who said his prayers without being told, loved his mama, and to my horror, attached himself to me with fish hooks I could not pull free. At night, in front of a television frozen forever on Animal Planet, he used me for a pillow, and no matter how much I chafed or squirmed or shoved, he always came back. I would fret and the woman would smile as he dozed on my shoulder, a toxic wad of neon green bubble gum hanging half out of his mouth. He followed me like a baby duck, stood glued to me in restaurants and stores, and expected me to hug him, as nasty as he was. I hugged, grimacing, as if I'd wrapped my arms around a porta potty. He even expected me to tuck him in at night, and as I did, I wondered what had happened to me. And who was this nearly neutered man who stood in line for Day-Glo nachos and sticky juice boxes, and paid good money to see the march of the goddamn penguins. But the reason that I worried about my boy, I hope my boy would be gentle. And I told him, I said, son, I don't care if you were a bull rider or a ballet dancer. I don't care. But it's a mean old world out there. And I want you to be ready for what comes. And I want to read y'all my favorite. Everybody's got a favorite graph. And about their people. And we will finish on this. You spend your boyhood in Alabama surrounded by men who were tougher than you. My Uncle Ed would break down truck tires, and he would have me hold. He would break them down with a sledge, and I would hold a chisel against the rim. And I asked him once, I said, what if you miss? He said, I don't miss. You know, he would have crippled me. So those are the kind of men. That was my barometer, you know. So that is why I worried about my boy. But I'm still proud of those men, and not necessarily for their political choices, but I'm proud of them. And we'll finish on this. And this is just the kind of man that I wanted to be, and in some ways still want to be. This was at a family reunion. The men segregated themselves under the chinaberry tree. They wore double-knit slacks and what we called sports shirts. Not one necktie or day of college between them, but capable men who fixed their own cars, patched their own water lines, and laid their own bricks. They were a mix of the old South and the new South. Men who drew their paychecks from the cotton mills, pipe shops, and steel mills, but still believed that you could make it rain if you hung dead snakes in the branches of trees. They were solid as the steel they rolled or the concrete they poured. They did not drink, did not cuss unless they were in the fraternity of like-minded men, and surrendered their paychecks to their wives the minute they walked in the front door. As they talked, they clicked chrome Zippo lighters toward thin, tight, hand-rolled cigarettes and stuffed strings of tobacco into their jaws until they looked deformed. Some were saved, some backslid, and some as yet unaffiliated. But even the ones who walked in the holy holy did not preach to the others out of respect. If you went to work and fed your babies, you were already halfway home. So they spoke of the secular, the secrets of fuel injection, how to put brake shoes on a 64 Corvair, or the best way to worm a good dog. They believed in a lot. They believed in General Motors, Briggs & Stratton, Craftsman, Poulan, John Deere, International, Tree Brand, Zebco, Remington, and Wolverine. And the bumper stickers on their trucks read Wallace, or nothing at all. Thank you.
Our next featured author, John Dufresne, has written 2 collections of short stories, 4 novels, and a book on writing fiction. He currently teaches creative writing at Florida International University. He discusses the writer's life and reads from his latest book, Requiem Mass.
Requiem Mass is a novel that is sort of a novel disguised as a memoir, and so I'm writing a novel, but the central character is writing his memoirs, and in writing his memoirs, he steals my memories. So I'll read a few sections from it, but I wrote a little essay about the writing of Requiem Mass and the choice between writing memoir and writing fiction. Let me just read this, and then I'll read a few sections from the book. This is called I Remember, I Believe. I set out to write a memoir, but I worried about what I'd forgotten and who I might be if I could remember everything. But of course, we don't remember everything. We live by forgetting. What we forget is as crucial to identity as what we recall. I have a faulty memory just like you do, and like my friend Bart does. Bart tells me that when we were going through our cocaine phase, I slept with his wife while he was passed out on his kitchen floor. I didn't, And I don't know why Bart needs to tell himself that I did, or why his wife told him that I did. I'd remember a betrayal like that. In fact, it would make an affecting scene in a novel, but it would be a lie in my memoir, wouldn't it? Would Bart still be talking to me if it were true? If I don't remember an incident, it can't be part of my story. I planned to take Nabokov's advice and follow thematic designs through my life. I began with my earliest memory. I was 16 days old. My godmother, Aunt Bee, was dandling me on her knee when she got distracted. By what, I don't remember. But in hindsight, I'd guess she was reaching for a highball or contemplating the imminent disillusion of her marriage to Uncle Jimmy and the effect the separation and her proximate departure would have on her 1-year-old daughter. At any rate, I slipped off her lap and fell to the floor, landing on my pointy blonde head. Before I knew it, Mom had swept me up in her arms and lavished me with kisses. She sat us down in the vacated chair. What I remember most clearly is all the consoling attention Aunt Bee received from the guests at my christening party. The tumble happened. Almost certainly the memory comes from being told about the spill years later and imagining the scene so vividly as I listened that I can remember the details of the reconstruction today. Next to the armless chair from which I fell was a dining room table set with plates of food. And if I were writing fiction and not memoir, if I were not pretending to remember, I would tell you that there were plates of split Vienna rolls stuffed with tuna, chicken, and bologna salads, a Velveeta cheese log, tortilla pie, and cocktail franks, all inveterate family party fare. But the food is out of focus, as are the several gray gentlemen standing behind my godparents, dressed in what I now recognize as gabardine and tweed. Memory's primary job is to help us live in the present and prepare us for the future, to keep us alive. You think, the last time I ate oysters, I ended up violently ill on the streets of Victoria, British Columbia, and you see yourself in your soiled jeans crawling for the cover of the hedges and lilac bushes in a downtown churchyard, an exhaustive and crushing pain seizing your bowels. So I think I'll have a smoked mullet today. We don't need to remember what is not vital and salvific, so our memories are naturally fallible and malleable. We can remember that which did not happen, as false memory studies have proven. Are you listening, Bart? It's called counterfactual thinking, and we all do it. An imprecise memory insists upon elaboration. Memories are remnants and impressions, and where there's a gap, we fill it in. When we remember the gist, not the unblemished caboodle, not the dialogue verbatim, but the essence of the conversation and its attendant emotions. Small talk evaporates. Memory is the past revised, recreated, and distilled. And while the gist is not a lie, embellishment may make it so. As far as I can tell, I use the same mental system to imagine as to remember. And it's the same system my unconscious brain uses to dream. In all three cases, I'm forming a mental image of what is not really present. I'm seeing and hearing what isn't here. Memory is reproductive imagination. I can try to be accurate, but I'm not always sure my rascal memory isn't up to its tricks. Did I dream? I had the conversation with my sister about the night Uncle Rudy held a knife to Aunt Lois's throat. Or did we actually talk about it on the night we learned that Uncle Rudy had crashed his Harley into a bridge abutment and died? Did I see my uncle brandishing a serrated knife and his children cowering in the corner, or did someone tell me about it? I'm never quite sure if I did something, or I read about it, or dreamed it, or saw it in a movie, or made the whole thing up. Why should we expect unvarnished truth from memoirists? Memoir is as much persuasive essay as it is narrative. It's a licit way of lying. Perhaps this is not the writer's life you're reading about at all, but what he wants his life to have been. For the reader, the appeal of memoir might be inspirational. Here's a real person, not one of those made-up ones, and his life was in worse shape than mine. The writer's been to hell and back, and now look at him. He's making gazillions by writing about it. But these real-life survivors are fabricating at least some of their past, as soon as they begin writing scenes. Here's a quote from a bookstore ad that popped up on my email 10 minutes ago. Augustin Burroughs is known to take unsettling elements from his life and turn them into memoirs. The appeal for the writer might be egotistical. I'll get people to buy my version of the truth so they'll understand me as the damaged but heroic person I long to be, and my chances of being Oprah'd will be enhanced. Last night I saw a promo for True TV, TRU, not quite true, which offered this inducement to viewers. It's not reality, it's actuality. The slogan would seem to suggest that what passes for reality on other networks is in fact only a semblance of reality, something staged, plotted, and inauthentic. In that sense, we might consider memoir as an understandable simulacrum of truth. Storytellers are forced to make life more interesting than it is. But why pretend? Better, I thought, to write a novel and let my narrator, a fiction writer himself, and my alter ego, not me, but the me I might wish to be, the sweeter me, the smarter me, the me with the heartbreaking past and the resplendent future, write his memoir and plagiarize my life in doing so. Then, as he looks back at his life, I can use his gaze to see my own past. And it's unimportant to me and to the reader which memories were borrowed, which invented, and which enhanced. Facts are not the point. Memoir is what didn't happen in quite this way. Fiction is what happens. And I suspect my narrator, call him Johnny, will wind up at his friend Bart's apartment one winter evening with a gram of Peruvian flake, and the reader and I might find out what really happens after Bart collapses in a heap on the kitchen floor. Okay, so that's that. Thanks. Thank you. Let me start with this one since I flipped open to it. This actually begins with an actual conversation that I had with my mother. My mother does believe that the husband, the father, is my father, but she doesn't believe the mother is her, thank goodness. So this is begins with an actual conversation I had, and then we go on to a conversation that I overheard, actually, in a restaurant. That's what writers do in restaurants. If you see somebody near you with a pen and a piece of paper or a napkin, then you know what they're doing. Today is Mother's Day, and this morning Spot surprised Anik by leaping on the bed and waking her up with a kiss. The two of them are down at the beach playing surf frisbee, and I'm here at my desk interrupting the flow, if not the course, of our story because of something I just remembered about Mom. This happened when I was 10. It was Saturday morning, and Dad was at work pumping gas at DeRouge's Flying A. Audrey sat in her closet reading 5 Little Peppers and How They Grew. Mom and I were on the couch listening to Harry Belafonte records and eating Sky bars. Mom put her arm around my shoulders and kissed the top of my head. Harry had to leave a little girl in Kingston Town. Mom told me that when she first learned that she was pregnant, she tried to abort me by holding her mother's hand and jumping off the kitchen table 25 times a day for 25 days. She sounded wistful, said she and her mother had never felt so close. She was 22 then, Catholic and unmarried, so you can see what kind of awkward position your coming put me into. Mom, that's a sin. When that didn't work, your grandmother, bless her heart, gave me some pennyroyal tea. It's what they used in Canada. She had 18 brothers and sisters. She would have had 27. We tried Queen Anne's lace seeds, vitamin C, falling down a flight of stairs. Why would you want to kill me? Let's not be melodramatic, Johnny. You weren't a person then, were you? You were a problem. So what changed your mind? Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like. Maybe I wouldn't have married your father. I could have gone to college, maybe, to secretarial school, gotten my derriere out of this hellhole. Sorry. What's done is done. She broke off a square of Sky Bar, handed it to me, vanilla nougat, my least favorite. Maybe I could have been someone, that's all I'm saying. I wondered about my father's role in this noxious business. When Mom told him her secret, making it their secret, did he hesitate in marrying her? Was that pained look on his face what drove her to the kitchen table? As a kid, I thought a lot about my close call with non-existence. What would it have been like not to have been? What or who would have taken my place in this world? What would have been right here in this space where I sit at my desk with my fountain pen in my hand in Dania Beach, Florida? Air, emptiness, space, ether. There would be no desk, of course, and Anik Pascal would be in love with another man, and Spot, poor Spot. By the way, I'm talking about my beloved grandmother, Grace, mind you, the woman who loved me more extravagantly and resolutely than anyone ever has. Grace's husband, Mr. Burt Packard, shop foreman at New England High Carbon, vanished from Requiem when Grace was pregnant with my mother and has not been heard from since. Grace always said good riddance to bad garbage whenever Bert's name was mentioned, the only ugly comment I ever heard her make about anyone. She practically raised me until I was 6.5, and she died of a not unexpected heart attack, died on her kitchen floor with a lit Herbert Tarryton cigarette in her fingers. Grace had gnarled, arthritic hands, swollen knuckles, twisted fingers. She had been a seamstress all her life, but when I knew her, she was having a hard time doing the fine handwork. Whenever she sewed clothing on the Singer machine in her bedroom, I'd sit on the linoleum floor by the treadle and play games of construction and demolition with the darning eggs and bobbins. I can remember the intermittent drill of the machine, the sizzle of rain on a roof and window, and Grace humming one of her songs from the 40s. I don't think of myself as a superstitious person, although I do think that if I'm watching the Marlins and they're ahead, then I can't change the channel or to blow the lead. But I never break an egg in a dark, shadowed place. I never leave a sliced onion on the counter, or I let discord in the door. And if I drop a spoon, Anik has to pick it up. I know that if I'm interrupted in the making of a bed, I'll have a sleepless night. I keep to these habits because Grace taught them to me. When I look at the blue flame of a candle, I remember how Grace told me the blue meant a spirit was in the room with us. And I remember when she told me that at the kitchen table on a summer morning, the two of us eating cantaloupe a la mode, the ice cream dripping down my chin. She had been telling me about her brother Romeo, whose birthday it was, and who died of influenza when he was 9. I asked Mom how she felt when I was born. I was in a great deal of pain. You weren't happy to see me? I threw up every morning for 7 months. So then you must have been relieved, at least. She took off the Belafonte and put on the Mario Lanza, the student prince. You had a pointy little head. Your father called you Denny Dimwit. Who's Denny Dimwit? A friend of Willie Winkle's. Who? You were not a pretty baby. I keep my parents' formal black and white wedding portrait here on my bookcase between my Jack Kerouac bobblehead doll and my Viewmaster stereoscope. Rainey and Francis, Mr. and Mrs. Rainey's in a white shirt, white tuxedo jacket, black slacks and black shoes. His black bow tie is crooked. He's wearing a light pink, I would guess, boutonniere. His black hair is combed back in a neat little pompadour. His hands are folded at his waist, left over right. He's wearing a gold watch, the one he still wears, a Lord Elgin with the second hand where a 6 should be. Stares soberly into the camera lens. I once asked Frances why Dad didn't smile for the photo. She said, his teeth. Frances's short hair is crowned with a rhinestone tiara. A starched lace veil is pulled off her face and falls over her shoulders to her waist. Her gown is satin and lace with a beaded insert at the neck. The sleeves are long. The full skirt is not so unlike a 3-tiered wedding cake. She holds a tussy-mussy of tea roses in her hands and a string of rosary beads. Her head is held back. Her smile is nervous, reserved, and shows mostly in her wide eyes and her raised brow. I stare at the photo and try not to look through the eyes. I try to look through the eyes to the thoughts and feelings simmering behind them. I see that Dad understands. He now has his chance to become a new man, a mature and enterprising breadwinner. And he knows he is up to the challenge. He sees this new life spread before him like a holiday dinner, and he's hungry as a wolf. Mom is still a little queasy. She couldn't eat a thing, thank you. She doesn't even want to look at food, not even at the lacy wedding cake from Gannon's bakery. She's weary with being the center of attention. She'd like to sneak away, tow her shoes off, put her feet up, smoke a cigarette. And I know that I'm there too, curled on my back, trying out my new parts, stretching my fingers, opening and closing my new mouth. Anik's mom, Nettie, called me this morning after Anik and Spot had left for the beach. She thanked us for the flowers. What do you call them? I said, Peruvian lilies. Nettie's husband, Frank Nissen, her third husband, not Anik's dad, died in his bed last summer. And now she's finding her romance on the internet and hoping that some greater Phoenix area senior citizen will sweep her off her feet the way Big Frank did. She said, "You don't know what it's like to be dating against the clock, Johnny." "No, I don't," I said. Big Frank, I thought, was an acquired taste like deep-fried Twinkies. But Nettie loved that geezer to death, quite literally, as it turned out. Nettie told me about her last night blind date, how the first thing the guy asked her was, "Did you have a car?" "Yes, I have a car," she told him. "A Mocha Lincoln Town car with a sunroof. Is that all you're interested in?" I let the fool take me to dinner at Lolo's Chicken and Waffles. And then he got steamed when I wouldn't let him drive, said it didn't look right, the woman at the wheel. He asked me if I could chauffeur him to the VA on Monday morning. Imagine. I was still trying to imagine the dish of chicken and waffles. She said before that it was this little Sicilian. Came up to my shoulders, just off the spaghetti boat, this one. Right out of the gate, he wants to know how I feel about sex. Where's the romance anymore, Johnny? Times have changed, I told her. After we ate, I told him, "Have a sweet life, Massimo." Okay, that's that.